He leaned across the table, right past the candles, right past the wine glasses my sister had spent 20 minutes arranging, and he said it like he was commenting on the weather. You know what your problem is, June? You've spent your whole life being useful to people who forgot to be useful back. He smiled when he said it. That was the thing about Daniel. He always smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a smirk, nothing you could point to in a room full of witnesses and say, "There, that right there, that's what I mean." It was a warm smile, generous even. The kind of smile that made people trust him at open houses and closing dinners and neighborhood barbecues, where he'd pour your drink before you asked. The kind of smile that made my sister fall in love with him 11 years ago in a Whole Foods parking lot in Bethesda, Maryland, when he helped her load groceries into her trunk and told her she had the most honest face he'd ever seen. But I knew what lived underneath that smile. I'd known for years. And on that particular evening, a Thursday in October, sitting in their dining room in Chevy Chase, with the smell of roasted garlic and fresh rosemary hanging in the air, and my sister's hand trembling slightly as she set down the salad bowl, I knew something Daniel didn't. I knew my sister had sent me the signal. 3 days earlier, a voicemail. Her voice bright and steady, the way it always was when she needed me to understand that nothing she was saying was real. "Hey June, just calling to say hi. Oh, and I found Mom's old recipe for the lemon bars, the ones from the Blue Notebook. Call me back when you get a chance." The Blue Notebook. There was no Blue Notebook. There had never been a Blue Notebook. Our mother kept her recipes on index cards rubber-banded together in a kitchen drawer in our house in Silver Spring, and they were stained with olive oil and tomato sauce and the occasional smear of chocolate, and my sister and I both knew that. Every card, every stain. We could have drawn them from memory. The Blue Notebook was our code. We invented it when I was 14 and she was 17, the summer our father moved out and our mother started dating a man named Rick, who raised his voice at dinner and once threw a plate of spaghetti against the wall because the noodles were overcooked. Carolyn, my sister, told me if she ever mentioned the Blue Notebook in a conversation, it meant one thing. "I need you. Come now. Don't ask questions until we're alone." I hadn't heard her mention the Blue Notebook in 22 years, so when I sat down at that table and Daniel leaned across and told me what my problem was, I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I picked up my wine glass and I took a sip, and I looked at him over the rim with a face that I have spent my entire adult life perfecting. A face that says nothing. A face that gives nothing. A face that a man like Daniel looks at and sees exactly what he wants to see, which is a woman who is soft and manageable and just a little bit sad around the edges. My name is June Welford. I'm 41 years old. I'm a forensic accountant with the Treasury Department's Office of Inspector General, and for the past 6 years, I've made my living following money that powerful people thought they'd hidden well enough. I am very, very good at my job. And this is the story of how my brother-in-law, a man who thought I was decoration at his dinner table, discovered that he'd been performing for the wrong audience the entire time. But I need to go back. You need to understand how we got to that table, and you need to understand who I was before Daniel, and you need to understand why my sister's voice on that voicemail made me cancel a flight to Chicago and drive 45 minutes across the district to sit in her dining room and eat roasted chicken and smile at a man I was already building a case against in my head. You need to understand the lemon bars and the Blue Notebook and the woman who taught us that the quietest person in the room is not always the weakest one. That was our mother. Let me start there. Our mother, Diane Welford, née Kowalski, grew up in a row house in Hamtramck, Michigan, the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew your business, and your grandmother's business, and your dog's business. And if you left your front door unlocked, it wasn't because you were careless. It was because Mrs. Janowski across the street would bring over soup if she saw you sneeze. Diane married our father at 23, moved to Maryland at 25, had Carolyn at 26 and me at 29, and spent the next 2 decades keeping a house running and 2 daughters fed and a husband reasonably happy, which was more labor than anyone ever acknowledged, including our father. She had a saying. She used it the way other mothers used, "because I said so." She'd say it when I came home crying because a girl at school had called me boring. She'd say it when Carolyn got passed over for team captain, even though she was the best swimmer on the squad. She'd say it when she herself was sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night, paying bills our father should have been paying, a calculator in one hand and a pen in the other, and not a single tear on her face. She'd say, "Don't announce the war until you've already won it." I was 9 the first time I heard her say it. I didn't understand it then. I thought it was about being sneaky, about hiding things, and that didn't sit right with me because I was a kid, and kids want the world to be fair and loud and obvious. I wanted to stand in the middle of the schoolyard and scream at the girl who called me boring. I wanted someone to see the injustice and fix it. My mother looked at me with her tired brown eyes and shook her head once, just once, and said, "Junie, you scream now, they'll call you crazy. You wait, you build, you move in silence, and one day they'll call you something else entirely." I didn't ask what. I think I was afraid of the answer. Our mother died 7 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. She was gone in 11 weeks. Carolyn and I held her hands in the hospice room at Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring, and the last thing she said to me, the very last thing, was not "I love you," though I know she did. It was not goodbye. It was a question. "Are you watching out for your sister?" I said yes. I said, "Of course." I said, "Always." And then she looked at me with those tired brown eyes, and they weren't tired anymore. They were sharp and burning and absolutely certain, and she said, "Then don't wait as long as I did." I need to tell you who I am. Not the version Derek built in his head, the harmless one, the quiet sister-in-law who showed up to holidays with wine and left before dessert. The real one. My name is Nadine Okafor. I am 41 years old. I am a forensic accountant with the Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I have been there for 14 years. Before that, I spent 3 years at Deloitte in their federal audit practice. And before that, I graduated summa cum laude from Howard University with a double major in accounting and mathematics. I hold a certified fraud examiner credential, a CPA license in the state of Maryland, and a security clearance that took 11 months to process because they had to verify every address I had ever lived at, including the apartment on Georgia Avenue where the landlord had died and the records had been boxed up in a storage unit in Hyattsville. I say all of this not to impress you. I say it because Derek Lassiter never once asked me what I did for a living. Not once in 9 years of marriage to my sister. The few times it came up, he would wave his hand like he was clearing cigarette smoke and say something like, "Nadine pushes papers for the government," and then pivot to whatever he actually wanted to talk about, which was always himself. I am 5'3". I weigh 132 pounds. I have my mother's face, round and soft, and her habit of smiling when I am thinking something entirely different from what the smile suggests. People have always underestimated me. Teachers, supervisors, strangers at bars, men on dating apps, opposing counsel in depositions I have been called to testify at. They see the quiet. They see the small frame and the reading glasses and the cardigan, and they make a decision about me in the first 4 seconds, and they never revisit it. That is fine. That has always been fine. In my line of work, being underestimated is not a disadvantage. It is a weapon you never have to load. My grandfather, Ezekiel Okafor, understood this. He came to the United States from Lagos in 1971 with a mechanical engineering degree that no one in Baltimore would honor and a wife who spoke 4 languages, none of which mattered to the men at the hiring offices. He worked as a janitor at Johns Hopkins for 9 years. 9 years of mopping floors in buildings where men with half his education lectured about thermodynamics. He never complained. He never explained. He filed paperwork, took classes at night, retested, recertified, and by the time I was born in 1983, he was a licensed professional engineer for the state of Maryland, with his own small consulting firm operating out of a converted row house in Pigtown. The firm was never large, 4 employees at its peak, but it was his, and it was legitimate, and it was built on the principle that he repeated to me so often I can still hear his voice when I close my eyes, that deep, measured baritone with the edges of Yoruba still shaping his vowels. Nadine, a fool shows you his cards because he wants you to be afraid. A wise person never shows their cards at all. But the wisest person, she lets the fool believe she has no cards. He died when I was 26. Prostate cancer. Caught too late because he was the kind of man who considered going to the doctor a form of weakness, which is the one area where his wisdom failed him completely. I spoke at his funeral. I could barely get through it. Carolyn sat in the front row and held my coat and my purse and did not cry until I cried, because that was what she always did. She waited for me to go first, and then she followed. That was the thing about my sister. She was 2 years younger than me, but she had always been the braver one in the ways that mattered. She was the one who talked to strangers. She was the one who moved to a new city for a man she had known for 5 months. She was the one who believed, truly believed, that people were good until they proved otherwise. I was the opposite. I assumed nothing. I watched. I cataloged. I noticed which drawers people opened when they thought no one was looking. I have a bad left knee from a fall I took during a hiking trip in Shenandoah when I was 33. It aches when rain is coming, and I walk with a slight limp on cold mornings that most people never notice. I mention this because Derek noticed it exactly once. It was Thanksgiving 2019, and I was carrying a casserole dish up the front steps of their house in Bethesda, and my knee buckled slightly, and I caught myself on the railing, and Derek was standing in the doorway, and he looked at me, and he did not move to help. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger stumbling on the sidewalk, with that flicker of second-hand embarrassment, and then he turned back inside and called out to Carolyn that her sister was here. Her sister, not Nadine. Never Nadine. I set the dish down on their kitchen counter. It was sweet potato casserole, my mother's recipe, the one with the brown sugar and pecans that Carolyn loved, and that Derek always pushed to the side of his plate like a child avoiding vegetables. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and the expensive olive oil Derek ordered from some boutique supplier in Northern California. And Carolyn was standing at the stove with her back to me, and I could see, even before she turned around, that something was wrong. It was in her shoulders. They were too high, pulled up toward her ears like she was bracing for something. She turned and smiled at me. It was a perfect smile. Warm, open, the kind of smile that makes you feel like the most important person in the room. But her left hand was resting on the counter, and her index finger was tapping. 3 slow taps, a pause, 3 more. Our signal. The one we had invented as children, sharing a bedroom in our parents' house on Riggs Road in Hyattsville. The one that meant, I need you, but I cannot say it out loud. I smiled back. I hugged her. I told her the kitchen smelled amazing. And inside my chest, something ancient and patient and absolutely ruthless opened one eye. I did not react that night. I want you to understand that. I hugged my sister. I complimented her roast. I sat at that dining table in their house in Columbia, Maryland, and I ate every bite on my plate. I laughed at the right moments. I asked about their neighbors and their new landscaping and the trip they were planning to Hilton Head. I did everything a good sister-in-law does at a Sunday dinner. But I watched. That was the first time I truly watched Derek with clear eyes. And what I saw made the food in my stomach turn to cement. It started small. Vanessa asked if anyone wanted more wine, and Derek said, without looking up from his phone, "Not for you." Just like that. Flat. Like he was telling a dog to stay off the couch. Vanessa's hand, which had been reaching for the bottle, pulled back. She folded it in her lap. She smiled at me and said she was cutting back anyway. Doctor's orders. I knew for a fact that Vanessa had no medical reason to avoid wine. She was 39 and healthy. She ran 3 miles every morning before the sun came up. Then later, when I mentioned that Vanessa had always been the better cook between us, that our mother used to say Vanessa could make a 5-star meal from a can of beans and a prayer, Derek laughed. He said that was funny because when they first got married, she could barely boil water. He said he was the one who taught her everything she knew in the kitchen. He said it while reaching over and squeezing her shoulder in a way that looked affectionate if you were not paying attention. But I was paying attention. I saw the way his fingers pressed in just a little too hard. I saw the way Vanessa's smile tightened at the corners, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. I said nothing. That was March of 2019. Over the next 18 months, I collected moments the way some people collect stamps, carefully, methodically, without ever letting anyone see the album. There was the 4th of July barbecue at their place. Derek's friends from his sales job at the Lexus dealership in Laurel were there. Big, loud men with expensive watches and opinions about everything. Vanessa had spent 2 days preparing food. Brisket, corn salad, her grandmother's peach cobbler. When one of the wives complimented the brisket, Derek jumped in before Vanessa could respond. He said he had done all the seasoning, that Vanessa just did the easy parts. Everyone laughed. Vanessa looked down at her paper plate and pushed a piece of corn around with her fork. I was standing 6 feet away, holding a can of ginger ale, and I watched my sister shrink. Physically shrink. Her shoulders caved inward. She made herself smaller so that Derek could take up more room. I said nothing. But I remembered. There was Thanksgiving at our parents' house in Hyattsville that same year. Our mother had asked Vanessa to bring the sweet potato casserole, a family tradition, the recipe handed down from our grandmother Pauline. When Vanessa walked in with the dish, Derek was right behind her, and before she even got her coat off, he announced to the whole room that he hoped it turned out better than last year, because last year it was practically inedible. Our father, who is a quiet man, a retired postal worker who believes in minding his own business, looked at Derek for a long moment. Then he looked away. Our mother kept her eyes on the turkey. Nobody said a word. Vanessa laughed. She actually laughed and said Derek was right. She had overcooked it last year. She was hoping to redeem herself. She said it with that same perfect smile, the one that cost her everything and showed nothing. After dinner, I found her alone in the upstairs bathroom. Our old bathroom, the one with the chipped tile and the window that never closed all the way. The bathroom where we had once practiced dance routines and braided each other's hair and whispered about boys we liked from school. She was sitting on the edge of the tub. She was not crying. Her face was dry and completely still, and somehow that was worse than tears. I sat down next to her, and for a while neither of us spoke. Then I asked her, just once, quietly, if she was okay. She said she was fine. She said Derek was just stressed from work. She said marriage was hard and that I would understand when I found the right person. She said it like she was reading from a script she had memorized so thoroughly she no longer noticed the words had no meaning. I did not push. I wanted to, God knows I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her and tell her that this was not stress, that stressed people do not systematically dismantle the person they promise to love. But I knew Vanessa. She would have shut down. She would have defended him. She would have pulled away from me, and then I would have lost the only vantage point I had. So I said, okay. I said I loved her. I said I was always here. And I left it there, sitting on the floor between us like a door she could open whenever she was ready. The third incident was the worst. It was February 2020, a few weeks before the world shut down. Vanessa's birthday. She turned 40. I had organized a small dinner at a restaurant in Baltimore, a nice place in Fells Point that she had wanted to try for months. I invited our parents, our cousin Diane, two of Vanessa's friends from her job at the county library. Derek came late. He walked in 20 minutes after everyone else, sat down without apologizing, and immediately ordered a drink. When Vanessa opened my gift, a bracelet that had belonged to our grandmother Pauline, the one with the small garnet stones, she teared up. She held it against her chest and said it was the most thoughtful gift she had ever received. Derek looked at the bracelet, looked at me, and said it must be nice to have the time and money for sentimental gestures when you do not have a husband or kids or a mortgage to worry about. The table went silent. My mother set down her fork. Diane stared at her water glass. Vanessa reached over and put her hand on Derek's arm and said he was just joking, that he had a dry sense of humor. But her index finger was tapping against the inside of his wrist. 3 slow taps, a pause, 3 more. She was signaling me while touching the man she needed to be saved from, and he had no idea. That was the night I stopped being patient and started being strategic. I drove home that night in silence. No radio, no podcast, nothing. Just the sound of the engine and the wet hiss of tires on the February road between Annapolis and my apartment in Federal Hill. The Chesapeake was black on my left, the lights of the Naval Academy barely visible through the fog, and I gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2 and replayed those taps in my mind. 3 slow, pause, 3 more. The same signal Vanessa and I had invented when we were 9 and 11 years old, sleeping in a tent in Grandpa's backyard in Easton, convincing each other there were bears in the Maryland woods. 3 taps meant, come get me. 3 taps meant, I am not safe. She had not used that signal in 23 years. I pulled into my parking spot on Warren Avenue and sat in the car for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I was not crying. I was calculating. There is a difference, and it is the most important difference I have ever learned. Crying is release. Calculating is preparation. That night, I chose preparation. The next morning, I woke up at 4:30, the way I always do. Old habit from my years at the Defense Intelligence Agency. I made coffee, black, no sugar, and I sat at the small desk by my bedroom window where I could see the harbor cranes in the pre-dawn dark, and I opened a new notebook. Not my work notebook, not my personal journal, a new one, blue cover. I wrote one word on the first page: evidence. I want to be honest about something. I did not become a different person that night. I did not transform. I was already who I needed to be. 12 years of intelligence analysis had taught me how to build a case file, how to cross-reference sources, how to verify claims before acting on assumptions. What changed was not my capability. What changed was my target. The first thing I did was call Diane, not my mother, because my mother would panic and confront Derek directly, which would make everything worse. Diane, because Diane was quiet, and Diane noticed things, and Diane had been watching Derek for 3 years, with the careful eyes of a woman who has survived her own bad marriage. I called her at 7 in the morning and said I needed to talk about Vanessa. Diane said she had been waiting for one of us to call. We met at a diner in Severna Park, halfway between us. She ordered pancakes she never touched. She told me things I had suspected but never confirmed. That Vanessa had stopped bringing Lily and Sam to Sunday dinners because Derek said the kids needed structure, not chaos. That Vanessa had changed her phone number twice in the past year, and each time Derek had been the one to send the new number to the family, always from his own phone. That Vanessa had lost 15 pounds since Thanksgiving and told Diane it was a new diet, but her collarbones were sharp and her eyes were flat, and Diane did not believe her. I wrote everything down. Dates, details, exact quotes. I asked Diane if Vanessa had ever said anything explicit. Diane shook her head. She said Vanessa always smiled. She said the smile was the thing that scared her most. Over the next 6 weeks, I moved slowly and deliberately. I contacted a family law attorney in Anne Arundel County named Patricia Sheldon, a woman I had been referred to by a colleague at work whose sister had gone through something similar. Patricia was in her 60s, gray-haired, reading glasses on a chain, and she spoke with the calm precision of someone who had seen every version of this story. She told me the most important thing was documentation. She told me the second most important thing was that Vanessa herself had to be the one to act when the time came, because no one can rescue someone who has not decided to leave. She told me the third most important thing was patience. I was already good at patience. I had spent 4 years being patient. Now, my patience had a purpose. I began keeping a detailed log. Every family interaction, every phone call, every text message. I noted the times Derek called Vanessa during our conversations and how quickly she answered, always by the second ring. I noted the way she asked permission before making plans. I noted the language she used, the apologizing, the minimizing, the way she had started referring to herself in the third person when describing her own feelings, as if she were someone else, someone she was reporting on rather than inhabiting. I also did something I was not sure was ethical, and I did it anyway. I ran a background check on Derek Malloy using databases I still had access to through my security clearance. I know that was a line. I know that. But I found what I found. 2 prior protective orders filed by 2 different women in 2 different states, one in Pennsylvania and one in Delaware. Both withdrawn before hearings. Both from women who had once been engaged to Derek Malloy and then were not. I printed the records and put them in the blue notebook and felt my hands shake for the first and only time during the entire process. I did not tell Vanessa any of this. Not yet. Patricia said to wait. She said when the moment came, Vanessa would reach out. And when she did, everything needed to be ready so that hesitation had no room to grow. So I prepared. I set up a separate savings account at a credit union in Columbia and deposited $3,000 from my own savings. I researched emergency custody procedures in Maryland. I identified a domestic violence advocacy center in Glen Burnie that offered legal support and temporary housing. I compiled everything into a folder, physical, not digital, because digital can be monitored by someone who checks your phone while you sleep. And through all of this, I kept showing up to family dinners. I kept smiling at Derek. I kept bringing wine and side dishes and birthday presents for Lily and Sam. Derek kept making his comments, and I kept absorbing them like water into sand. He told me once, in March, that I seemed different, calmer. He said it like it was a compliment. I said thank you and passed the potatoes, and under the table my sister tapped my ankle with her foot. One tap. Just one. I am still here, I tapped back. I know. The months between March and June were the longest of my life. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. That was the discipline of it. That was the part nobody tells you about when they talk about standing up for someone you love. They tell you about the moment you act. They never tell you about the 90 days before when you smile and chew and swallow and laugh and drive home and sit in your apartment in Odenton staring at a folder you cannot open yet because the timing is not right. I met with the attorney 4 times. Her name was Patricia Okafor, and she worked out of a small office on West Street in Annapolis, 2nd floor above a Thai restaurant. And every time I climbed those stairs, I could smell lemongrass and chili, and my stomach would clench because I associated that smell with the knowledge that my sister's life was being taken apart and rebuilt on paper. Patricia was thorough in a way that made me feel both safe and sick. She explained that Maryland is an equitable distribution state, not community property. She explained that emotional abuse without physical evidence is difficult but not impossible to document. She explained that Megan's name was not on the house in Pasadena, even though she had paid half the down payment from her savings, because Derek had convinced her it was simpler to keep it in one name for the mortgage application, and she had believed him because, when you love someone, you believe the reasonable-sounding thing they say, even when it is designed to erase you from your own life. Patricia asked me once why Megan was not sitting in that chair herself. I told her the truth. Because he checks her mileage, because he tracks her phone, because the only place she can go without suspicion is her sister's apartment, and even then she has 90 minutes before he starts texting. Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she said, I understand. We will build this so that when she is ready to sit in this chair, she will only need to sit once. I want to be clear about what I was not doing during this time. I was not plotting revenge. I was not fantasizing about Derek's downfall. I was building a door. That is all. A door my sister could walk through when she decided to walk. The decision had to be hers. Patricia said that. The advocate at the center in Glen Burnie said that. Every book I read said that. And I knew it already because I knew my sister, and I knew that if I pushed her, she would retreat, because that is what you do when someone else has been controlling your movements for 8 years. You flinch from anyone who tries to steer you, even toward safety. So I waited. I updated the folder. I documented. In April, Derek's mother Helen came down from Bel Air for Easter. We had dinner at the Pasadena house. Helen was a small, precise woman who kept her opinions organized like silverware and deployed them with similar sharpness. She told Megan the ham was dry. She told Megan the children's clothes did not match properly. She told Megan that Sam needed speech therapy and that it was a mother's job to notice these things early. Derek sat at the head of the table and said nothing, and his silence was its own kind of endorsement. I watched Megan absorb each comment the way I had watched her absorb Derek's for years, with a slight nod, a murmured agreement, a readjustment of posture, as if she could make herself small enough to stop being a target. After dinner, I helped Megan wash dishes. Helen was in the living room with the children, and Derek had gone to the garage to work on something that did not need working on, which was his usual method of disappearing while his mother did the work he preferred not to do directly. Megan's hands were in the soapy water, and she said, very quietly, without looking at me, "He told me last week that if I ever tried to leave, he would make sure I never saw the kids again. He said his mother would testify that I was unstable." He said it calmly, like he was reading a weather report. I dried a plate. I set it down. I said, "What did you say back to him?" She said, "Nothing." I just loaded the dishwasher. I said, Megan, I need you to listen to me. He cannot do what he says he can do. The law does not work the way he is telling you it works. I have spoken to someone who knows. She went very still. The water kept running over her hands. She said, You spoke to someone. I said, Yes, an attorney, a good one. Everything is confidential. Nothing has been filed. Nothing happens until you say it happens. But the door is there, whenever you want it. She did not respond for a long time, 30 seconds maybe. It felt like a season. Then she pulled her hands out of the water and dried them on the towel I was holding. And she looked at me, and her eyes were the exact color of our mother's eyes. And she said, Not yet, but soon. Do not let me forget I said soon. I said, I will not. She went back to washing. I went back to drying. Helen called from the living room asking if there was coffee, and Megan said yes, in a voice as steady as a highway line. I made the coffee. I served it in the good cups. I sat across from Derek, and he told a story about a colleague at work who had been fired for incompetence, and everyone laughed, and I laughed too, and inside my chest the folder was growing thicker by the day. In May, I added one more thing. I went to the Anne Arundel County Courthouse, and I researched emergency protective orders. I learned the process, the forms, the filing window. I made a copy of everything and put it in the folder. I also opened a separate bank account at a credit union in Crofton, not connected to any account Derek knew about, and I deposited $3,000, my own money, deployment savings I had never touched. It was not much, but it was enough for a security deposit and first month somewhere safe. I listed Megan as a joint account holder, but I did not tell her yet, because she had said not yet, and I was honoring that. The account sat there, like a life raft folded in a closet. Ready, patient, dry. Derek invited me to a barbecue on Memorial Day weekend. I brought potato salad and a six-pack, and my silence, and I wore all of them comfortably. The barbecue was at their place in Severna Park, the backyard with the wooden deck Derek had built the summer before, the one he talked about like he had raised a cathedral. There were maybe 15 people there, some of his co-workers from the dealership, a couple from their church, Megan's friend Tracy from the nail salon. The grill was going, and Derek was holding court beside it, tongs in one hand, beer in the other, telling a story about a customer who had tried to trade in a flooded Nissan. Everyone laughed. He was good at that. He could fill a yard with sound and make people feel like they were somewhere worth being. I sat on the deck steps with my potato salad on my knee, and I watched Megan move through the gathering. She was smiling. She refilled drinks before anyone asked. She laughed at the right moments. But she was wearing a long-sleeved denim shirt in 82-degree heat, and when she reached across the cooler for ice, her left sleeve rode up, and I saw a bruise the color of a ripe plum wrapped around her forearm like a bracelet. She caught me looking. She pulled the sleeve down. She smiled wider. I looked away because that was what she needed me to do. Derek came over around 5, after his third or fourth beer, and leaned against the railing above me. You know what I like about you, Claire? You just sit there. You don't make a fuss. You're like furniture. Good furniture, though, like a recliner. He laughed, and a few people nearby laughed too, because he had that gravity. I said nothing. I ate a chip. He shook his head and went back to the grill, and I heard him say something to his buddy Nate about how his sister-in-law was basically a golden retriever, loyal and dumb and happy to just be in the room. I finished my potato salad. I cleaned my plate. I helped Megan carry dishes inside, and when we were alone in the kitchen for 11 seconds, she whispered, "Thank you for coming." And I whispered, "The account is ready whenever you are." And she closed her eyes and nodded once. And then Derek's voice came from the deck, asking where the mustard went, and she opened her eyes and found the mustard and carried it out like nothing had happened. That was May. June passed. July 4th. Derek posted a family photo on Facebook, him and Megan and the kids in matching flag shirts, and he captioned it, "Blessed beyond measure." I saw Megan's smile in that photo. It was technically perfect, every muscle in the right place. But her eyes looked like someone standing very still in a house that was on fire. The distress signal came on a Tuesday in late July, 9:17 in the evening. My phone buzzed and it was a text from Megan that said just 3 words. Mom's lemon cake. That was it. That was our code from when we were girls. The phrase we had invented at 13 and 11 when our parents fought and one of us needed the other to come without questions. Mom's lemon cake. I had not heard it in over 20 years. I did not need to hear it twice. I was in my apartment in Odenton eating leftover pad thai. I put the container in the fridge. I put on shoes. I picked up the folder from the filing cabinet. I picked up my keys, and I drove to Severna Park in 14 minutes, doing 65 on Route 32, with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart in my ears. When I pulled up, the house looked normal from the street. Porch light on, Derek's Tahoe in the driveway. The basketball hoop he had installed for Tyler, casting a shadow on the garage door. I did not go to the front door. I went around the side through the gate to the back deck, the one he had built, the cathedral, and the sliding glass door was open and I could hear him before I could see him. He was standing in the kitchen. Megan was sitting on the floor beside the island with her back against the cabinet, and the kids were not there. I learned later they were at Tracy's house. Megan had sent them there an hour earlier, which meant she had known this was coming. Derek was not yelling. That was the thing people never understood. He almost never yelled. He was speaking in a low, measured voice, the kind of voice you use to explain something to someone you believe is stupid. And he was saying, "You think you can just take money out of the account without telling me? You think I don't see the statements. You think I'm an idiot, Megan. Is that what you think?" She had tried to move money. She had tried to transfer some of their joint savings somewhere, and he had caught it. She was sitting on the floor, not because he had pushed her, but because she had made herself small, which was a posture I recognized from clinical training. She was trying to disappear. I stepped inside through the sliding door, and I said her name. Just her name. Megan. Derek turned and looked at me, and his face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, then irritation, then something he rearranged into amusement. He said, "Claire, what are you doing here? This is a family matter." I said, "She is my family." He put his hands on the counter and leaned forward slightly, the posture of a man who is used to filling a room, and he said, "This is between me and my wife, and I need you to leave my house." He said it calmly. He said it like he was asking me to move my car. I did not leave. I looked at Megan. She was looking at me from the floor, and her eyes were not the eyes from the Facebook photo. They were awake. They were terrified, but they were present. She said, "I called her." Derek's jaw tightened. He looked at Megan, then at me, then back at Megan. "You called her. You called her to come to our house. For what?" Megan stood up. It took her a moment, and she used the counter to steady herself, and I saw her wince when she put weight on her left wrist. She stood and she looked at me and she said, "I'm ready." 2 words. I had waited 4 years to hear them. I opened the folder. I set it on the kitchen island between Derek and me, and I said, "This is a petition for an emergency protective order." It documents 14 months of incidents, including the emergency room visit on March 9th, where Megan told the nurse she fell down the stairs, but the radiology report shows a spiral fracture consistent with a twisting force applied to the forearm. It includes photographs taken on 6 separate occasions. It includes a statement from Dr. Karen Lowe, her therapist, whom she has been seeing since September. It includes the separate bank account I opened in her name, which you have no legal access to. Derek stared at the folder. He did not open it. He stared at it like it was something alive. I said, "Megan and the children will be staying somewhere safe tonight. You will be served with the protective order tomorrow morning. I recommend you do not contact her." He looked at me, and for the first time since I had known him, the amusement was gone. The charm was gone. The performance was gone. What was underneath was smaller than I expected. His lip moved like he was going to say something clever, but nothing came. He looked at the folder again, and then he looked at Megan, and he said, "You planned this." Megan picked up her purse from the chair by the door. She had already packed a bag, I realized. It was by the front door. She had packed it before she sent the text. She said, "Yes." Derek stood in his own kitchen holding a folder he would not open, and for the first time in 7 years he had no audience. The neighbors were not there. His poker friends were not there. His mother, who thought he walked on water, was not there. It was just the 3 of us, and the sound of the ice maker dropping cubes into the tray in the freezer, and Megan walking past him without looking back. She picked up the bag by the front door. It was a green duffel bag, the one she used to take to the gym before Derek told her the gym membership was a waste of money. She had packed it with the kids' pajamas and her documents and the external hard drive and 3 changes of clothes for each of them. And she had done all of this while Derek was at work and the kids were at school, and she had placed it by the front door like she was leaving for a weekend trip. She had been ready. She had been ready before she ever sent me that text. I watched Derek's face as she walked out. He did not move. He did not grab her arm. He did not raise his voice. I think some part of him understood in that moment that the rules had changed, and that if he touched her, there were 2 witnesses present and a freshly filed police report and a lawyer whose phone number was already in her contacts. So he stood there. His jaw worked. His eyes followed her, and then they came back to me. And I saw something I had never seen in Derek's face before, which was the realization that he had miscalculated. Not guilt, not remorse, just the cold understanding that he had played the wrong hand. I said goodnight, Derek. I walked out after my sister. We drove to the Holiday Inn on Route 9 in Framingham. I had booked 2 adjoining rooms that afternoon. The kids were already there with my friend Priya, who had picked them up from school at 3:15, with a signed authorization letter I had prepared the week before. When we walked in, Sophie ran to Megan and wrapped her arms around her waist and said, "Mommy, are we going on a trip?" And Megan said, "Yes, baby, a little trip." Caleb was sitting on the bed watching cartoons, and he looked up and said, "Hi, Aunt Nora," and went back to the television. He was 4. He did not know yet that his life had just changed. Megan sat on the edge of the bed, and she did not cry. She held Sophie, and she looked at me over her daughter's head, and she mouthed the words, "Thank you." And I nodded and went to my room and closed the adjoining door halfway, and sat on my own bed and pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw colors. The protective order was served at 8:14 the next morning. Derek was home. He opened the door in sweatpants and a Patriots t-shirt, and the process server later told the attorney he looked like he had not slept. The order prohibited him from contacting Megan or the children and required him to vacate the family home within 72 hours. He called Megan's phone 11 times that day. She did not answer. He called my phone twice. I did not answer. He called our mother. That was the phone call I had been dreading. Mom called me at 2 in the afternoon, and her voice was the voice I knew from childhood. the voice that meant someone had disrupted the order of things and she needed it put back. She said, "Nora, what have you done?" She said, "Derek is beside himself." She said, "He is saying you ambushed him in his own home." She said, "Your sister has children to think about." She said, "Marriages have rough patches and you do not throw away a family over rough patches." I said, "Mom, did Megan ever tell you about the credit cards?" She was quiet. I said, "Did she tell you about the life insurance policy he took out in her name without telling her? Did she tell you about the time he locked her out of the house for 4 hours in February because she bought Sophie new snow boots without asking him first? Did she tell you about the bank account she is not allowed to see?" She said, "Every marriage has problems, Nora." I said, "Mom, he controlled every dollar she spent for 6 years. He isolated her from her friends. He told the children that Mommy is forgetful, and that is why Daddy handles the money. He made her believe she was incompetent, and then he used that belief to keep her trapped. That is not a rough patch. That is a cage." She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "I did not know it was that bad." I said, "I know you did not." She said, "Why did Megan not tell me?" And I almost said, "Because you taught us not to make waves, Mom. Because you taught us that keeping the family together was more important than keeping ourselves together. Because every time Megan tried to say something was wrong, you told her to be grateful she had a husband who provided." I almost said all of that, but I did not, because my mother was 71 years old, and she was learning something painful, and there was no point in making it worse. I said, "She was ashamed, Mom, and she was scared, and now she needs us." My mother came to the hotel that evening. She brought soup in a thermos and coloring books for the kids, and she held Megan for a long time without saying anything. And that was the most useful thing she had ever done. Derek retained a lawyer within 48 hours. His attorney filed a motion to dismiss the protective order, calling it an overreaction based on exaggerated claims. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later at Middlesex County Probate and Family Court in Cambridge. During those 3 weeks, Derek called our mother 4 times, trying to get her to intervene. He called 2 of Megan's friends from the PTA and told them Megan was having a breakdown and that I had manipulated her. He posted on Facebook about the importance of family and forgiveness and keeping promises. He did everything except look at himself. Megan moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Watertown. I co-signed the lease. Rachel helped her set up the financial forensics for the divorce filing, and the numbers were what we expected. Derek had accumulated over $43,000 in credit card debt in Megan's name. He had opened a brokerage account she did not know about. He had been siphoning money from the joint checking account into a separate savings account for at least 2 years. When Rachel laid it all out on her desk in neat columns, Megan stared at the numbers and said, "I thought I was bad with money. I thought that was true." He said it so many times I thought it was true. I said it was never true. She said, "I know that now." The hearing on the protective order took 40 minutes. The judge reviewed the financial documentation, the recording, the counselor's notes, and the testimony of Megan's therapist, who she had been seeing in secret for 5 months. The judge upheld the order and extended it for 1 year. Derek's attorney asked for a continuance and was denied. When we walked out of the courtroom, Derek was sitting on a bench in the hallway, and he looked at me and said, "I hope you are happy, Nora." I did not answer him. I had nothing to say to Derek that a court had not already said better. That night, I drove back to Grandma June's house because I had been staying there since Megan moved into the apartment, and it felt wrong to leave the place empty. The kitchen still smelled like her. Not perfume or anything you could name, but the particular warmth of a person who spent decades in one room, cooking and thinking and talking to herself while she stirred things on the stove. I sat at her table with a cup of tea I did not drink, and I thought about what Derek said in the hallway. "I hope you are happy, Nora." As if happiness were the point. As if I had done all of this because it felt good. It did not feel good. None of it felt good. Not the recording, not watching my sister's face when she realized the man she married had been draining her accounts for years. Not sitting in a courtroom while a judge read clinical words about emotional abuse and financial coercion. Not driving past the house on Winslow where Megan and Derek had hung a wreath every December and seeing the porch light off and the lawn already going rough at the edges. None of it was satisfying. People think these moments taste like victory. They do not. They taste like the end of something that should never have started. I thought about Grandma June and the things she told me when I was 17 and angry about a girl at school who had spread lies about me. I had wanted to confront her. I had wanted to make a scene in the cafeteria and force everyone to see the truth. Grandma June let me talk for 20 minutes, and then she said the thing that stayed with me longer than anything else anyone has ever said. She said, "Nora, the truth does not need your anger. It just needs you to hold still long enough for other people to see it." I did not understand that at 17. I thought holding still was weakness. I thought silence was surrender. I thought the loud thing was the brave thing, and the quiet thing was the coward's way out. It took me almost 20 years to understand what she actually meant. She was not telling me to be passive. She was not telling me to accept what was happening. She was telling me that when you know the truth, and you have the evidence, and you have done the work, then you do not need to scream. You just need to stand in the room. The truth will do the rest. That is what happened with Derek. I did not yell at him. I did not threaten him. I did not post about him or call his friends or try to humiliate him. I gathered documents. I made copies. I hired a lawyer. I helped my sister open her own bank account and find a therapist and file the paperwork and sit in a courtroom and speak clearly about what had been done to her. And when it was over, I walked past him in the hallway and I said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The truth had already spoken. I was just the person who held still long enough for everyone else to hear it. But I will be honest about something. I should have done it sooner. I knew something was wrong 4 years ago, maybe 5. I saw the way Megan flinched when her phone buzzed at dinner. I noticed she stopped buying herself things. I noticed she asked Derek's permission before ordering a second glass of wine at a restaurant. I noticed, and I told myself it was not my business. I told myself she was an adult. I told myself that marriage is complicated, and I had never been married, so what did I know? I told myself all the things people tell themselves when they do not want to act, because acting is hard and uncertain and might make everything worse. I was not wrong that marriage is complicated. I was not wrong that Megan is an adult. But I was wrong to let those truths become excuses. There is a difference between respecting someone's autonomy and watching them drown because you are afraid that pulling them out might offend them. I waited too long. I waited until Grandma June was gone, and the distress signal came and the situation was already at a point where legal intervention was necessary. If I had spoken up sooner, maybe it would not have gotten that far. Maybe Megan would have listened. Maybe she would not have. But I should have tried. I think about that sometimes. The years I spent noticing and not acting. The brunches where I changed the subject. The car rides home where I almost said something and then turned up the radio instead. I was so careful. I was so patient. And some of that patience was wisdom, but some of it was fear. I was afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of losing my sister. I was afraid that if I said his name out loud in the context of what I suspected, she would choose him, and I would be alone with a truth no one wanted to hear. Grandma June would have understood that fear. But she also would have told me that fear is not a plan. That waiting for the perfect moment is just another way of saying you hope the moment never comes. She was right about most things, and she would have been right about that too. I do not hate Derek. I want to be clear about that. I think he is a small man who found someone gentle and mistook her gentleness for permission. I think he convinced himself that controlling the money and the decisions and the narrative was the same as taking care of his family. I think he believed his own story so completely that when the judge read the ruling, he was genuinely confused. He was not performing confusion. He really did not understand. And that is the most frightening thing about people like Derek. They are not cackling villains. They are people who never once stopped to ask themselves whether they might be wrong. They built a life on the assumption that they were right, and when the foundation cracked, they just stood there in the rubble, looking around like someone else must have broken it. I do not forgive him. Forgiveness is Megan's to give if she ever wants to, and that is her choice and not mine. But I do not carry him around with me either. He is not heavy enough to carry. He is just a man who sat on a bench in a courthouse hallway and said, "I hope you are happy, Nora." As if happiness were something I stole from him, when all I did was help my sister take back what was already hers. There is a park bench near the water in Fells Point, where I go sometimes on Tuesday evenings after work. It is nothing special. The wood is weathered, and someone carved initials into the backrest years ago, and the harbor smells like diesel and salt and old rope. I sit there with a coffee from the place on Thames Street, and I watch the boats come in, and I do not think about anything in particular. That is the luxury I earned. The ability to sit somewhere and not think about anything in particular. It has been 14 months since the courthouse. Megan has a 2-bedroom apartment in Hampton now with the girls. Lily started kindergarten in September, and on her first day she wore rain boots, even though it was not raining, because she said rain boots are her brave shoes. Chloe is 3, and she has started speaking in full sentences, which she mostly uses to tell Lily that Lily is not the boss of her. They are fine. They are more than fine. They are becoming themselves, which is what children do when the air around them is not thick with someone else's need to control everything. Megan works at a pediatric dental office in Towson, front desk. She answers phones and schedules appointments, and she told me last month that a patient's mother complimented her nail polish, and she almost cried because she realized it was the first time in years she had chosen a nail polish color without wondering whether someone would have an opinion about it. She picked it because she liked it. That was the whole reason. She liked it. It was dark red, almost black. Derek would have called it trashy. She wore it for 3 weeks straight. She still has hard days. She called me on a Sunday in October, and she was sitting in her car outside a grocery store. And she said, "I cannot go in there, Nora. I do not know why, I just cannot go in." And I said, "Okay." And I sat on the phone with her for 20 minutes, not saying much, just being there. The way you hold a door open for someone without rushing them through it. Then she went in. She bought groceries. She came home and made pasta for the girls and texted me a photo of Chloe with tomato sauce on her forehead. That is what recovery looks like. It is not a straight line. It is a woman sitting in a parking lot gathering herself and then walking through automatic doors because the pasta will not cook itself and her daughters are hungry. I think about Grandma Josephine more than I expected to. Not in a sad way. in the way you think about someone whose voice settled into your bones so deep you cannot separate it from your own anymore. She died in that hospital bed in Dundalk, with the window cracked because she liked the sound of traffic. And she held my hand and she said, "Nora, you are the quiet one, but quiet is not the same as empty." I was 22. I did not understand what she meant. I thought she was telling me I was strong. She was not. She was telling me something more precise than that. She was telling me that the world would underestimate me and that I should let it. That the space between what people assume about you and what you actually are is the most powerful space you will ever occupy. She was right. She was right about almost everything. She was right about the strawberry preserves, and she was right about never lending money to Cousin Ray, and she was right about this. The quiet ones are not empty. They are just listening. They are gathering. They are waiting not because they are weak, but because they understand something that loud people never learn, which is that timing is everything, and patience is not passive. Patience is a verb. It is something you do with your whole body while the world mistakes you for doing nothing. I do not tell this story to be admired. I am not brave. Brave is Megan walking into that courthouse. Brave is Megan telling a judge what her life was really like behind a door that looked normal from the outside. Brave is a woman with 2 small children and no income of her own, saying, "This is not acceptable anymore." I just made phone calls. I read documents. I sat in a lawyer's office and asked questions. Anyone could have done what I did. The only difference is that I did it. But here is what I want to say to you if you are listening to this. If you are someone who has a sister or a brother or a friend or a mother, and you see something that does not look right, if you watch someone shrink over the years and you cannot name exactly what is wrong, but you feel it in your stomach like a low hum that never stops, trust that hum. Do not wait for proof. Do not wait for bruises. Do not wait for someone to say the words, "Help me," because sometimes people cannot say those words. Sometimes they have forgotten that help exists. Sometimes they send a signal so small that you could miss it if you were not paying attention. A plate of brownies at 10 on a Tuesday night. A sentence that does not make sense. A look across a kitchen that lasts 1 second too long. Pay attention. That is all I am asking. You do not have to be a lawyer. You do not have to be tough. You do not have to have a plan. You just have to pay attention, and then you have to act. Not tomorrow, not when it gets worse. Now. Because the person you love is sitting in a parking lot right now, trying to gather enough of themselves to walk through a door, and they should not have to do that alone. The harbor is getting dark. The boats are settling in for the night, and the water is doing that thing it does in November, where it turns the color of old steel. My coffee is cold. I should go home. I have a dog now, a mutt named Clementine, who I adopted from the Baltimore Humane Society, and who has one ear that stands up and one that does not, and who loses her mind with joy every time I walk through the door, as if I have been gone for years instead of hours. She is waiting for me. Dinner is waiting for me. My life is waiting for me. And it is small and ordinary and mine, and I would not trade it for anything. Quiet is not the same as empty. It never was.